So today we're going to move on to then how that kind of works into the idea of leadership, government, and democracy. As you can see there today, we're going to work on or discuss basically why democracies are all doomed to fail and why America will eventually follow a very similar path, okay? So today we're going to focus on the idea of how governments are structured and the order of leaderships, okay? So the first and most important thing is that all governments, all societies, all nations, all cultures start with the idea of a leader, a monarch, someone who takes charge, all right? So first off, we'll just say we have a king, and in this case, we'll talk about a leader. The most important thing that leaders do, and the greatest leaders, of course, do the common good, right? They're there to create civilizations, protect, sustain, and improve cultures, okay? This is your Moses, your Joshua's, your David's, your Genghis Khan's, even for some example, okay? The great leaders, the greatest leaders, of course, create great laws, okay? Your constitutions, your Bibles, your scriptures, these founding values for which people love and admire, and thus they want to follow. Rules and laws that create order and stability for society, in this case based out of the state of nature, where people live lawless and sometimes uncivilized. So great leaders come in, establish great values, great laws, in order to then create great nations or societies. Okay? Great leaders create great laws that thus establish great societies. These laws are easy to follow, and usually these laws are established not only as some kind of fear of the masses, but in most important cases, admiration of the masses. There are mainly two reasons why people follow the law. Either because they love the law so much, or because they are afraid of what will happen to them if they break the law. Either way, great leaders establish these laws for which great nations are then established, okay? On the same token, let's move over to types of governments then. So these we'll move over to some kind of a monarch, some kind of an oligarch, and last but not least, people's favorite here, democracy. Okay? Usually some kind of rule by one, some kind of rule by few, and then last but not least, some kind of rule by the many. And all basic political thought from the beginning of all history and civilization, it was always the idea that democracy was the absolute worst type of government that you can have upon the people. Mainly because the idea is that political sophistication, intelligence, and reason was just found in so few people that in order to make wise, reasonable government decisions about how a state or nation should run, there would only be a few people who would be capable of this ability. Thus, the idea of having widespread decision-making among the masses was completely unrealistic and completely irrational as well. So thus, we're going to discuss then now how we get from monarchs and oligarchs to democracy, and why those democracies always become monarchs. The idea, even from Thomas Jefferson to Plato and Aristotle again, is democracies always become dictatorships, or they always become some kind of monarch or tyrant. Why? We're about to find out. Well, we can highlight the emotionalism and intellectualism I have left. But most importantly, the founding values of great leaders, of great laws, create great nations. The converse of this is that terrible leaders create terrible laws that create then terrible or corrupted people. Okay? Corrupted leadership, selfish leadership, focuses on themselves, not so much on the common good, create terrible or corrupt laws. Those corrupt laws then only reinforce the corruption of the leader, the corruption of the society as a whole, and thus create a corrupt nation full of corrupt and horrible people in the end. Same thing, let's move on then to democracy in the same way. Okay? Kings, great leaders, should then create great followers, okay? They have a great establishment, right? You might start with a great King David, but in the end, there's only going to be one great leader, okay? And most times, people don't even actually believe that their son or daughter or their sibling will be as great as the person. So really, it's about the advising staff or the laws that are left over after the great person is gone. And in some cases, then this will be an oligarch, this will be the family, but there will never be the same person as the person at the top. But they leave a nice family or a nice staff who is then in charge of keeping those same laws in place. And again, the masses would be very upset and be very disgruntled if the oligarch or if the family then dismayed or varied off from the rule of the main dictator or of the king in this case. That family or that oligarchy then, if they keep and reinforce those good laws, should eventually give way to some kind of democracy. This is where the idea of democracy and its faithfulness or its ability to be effective comes in. Is that if you have a great leadership at the base and you create great laws, that over time you should be able to develop great people and great laws and a great government of democracy. That is the ideal, and of course we're going to now deal with the reality. The reality, of course, is that you have what? A corrupt leadership who has then a corrupt laws or a corrupt constitution. You're going to get what we have currently right now is a corrupt democracy. A democracy that is pretty much ineffective and doesn't really do anything as far as the common good goes, and we'll see that with our current election. So how does this again perpetuate itself and repeat? Great leaders create great laws. Great laws should create great nations. Unfortunately, on the other hand, bad corrupt leaders create bad corrupt laws, and that gets us to bad corrupt nations and bad corrupt societies. And this eventually gets into the hands of democracy. Over time, the perpetuation of the laws, those good feelings and ideals that the great leader have, wear off, mainly through increased materialism, creates capital, just create luxury items that people lose sight of the great values that established here. Okay, all the things that made a person or made a nation great, the values of ethics, morals, all things of character, the value of labor, all the things of freedom and justice, all those great things over time can be written down for great laws. And yes, over 100 years, even 150 years, you can sustain these laws, and people will still have an admiration for the great king or the great founding fathers who came in and established these great laws. But over time, again, those fade. And a nation will only be great for so long because over time the people just lose sight of it. They lose sight of those great values, and this could be for a plethora of reasons. Again, greed, rampant individualism, a pushing away from, of course, the intellectual, reasonable world and one full with emotions, and now a perpetuation of ignorance. But even in democracies, historically, what generally happens is, of course, is the nation gets so sick, a nation gets so ill, a nation becomes so decrepit of its former state that people just eventually clamor and just aspire for the nation of old. And this is, I believe, is what America is facing now. A country in disarray, looking for the times of old and the idea of greatness and making America great again and all that great business. But the idea, of course, is we are now here where the perpetuation of ignorance is just widespread. Okay? All democracies will become a dictatorship or will become a monarch. Why? Because the people will have no choice. When the society gets this bad and when it becomes so corrupt and you've got widespread ignorance, widespread selfishness, widespread greed, there is no longer any common good. There is now widespread self-interest and materialism. There's no longer a sustaining or a protection or improvement of our community. Once that is gone and it becomes widespread and perpetuates itself for too long, you will have a nation that will just do about anything for a restoration of goodness, or in this case, a restoration of founding values or a restoration of greatness. And in this case, they will sacrifice and give up all kinds of rights which they never thought they would believe. We will do anything if you will just take us back to a previous time when this nation was as good as it was founded to be. And they will give up rights, give up democracy, give up all kinds of freedoms. Why? For the ideals of old or for the times of old. So, we're sick of our elected officials. Presidential election is a sham. Voting itself has become a sham, as you can see by the process of delegates. America has reached a point in the next election or two where it will be so bad that it'll be time for, yes, complete shunning and just complete abandonment of all freedom and economic and equality values, and a time to return to some kind of a monarch, some kind of great leadership. A great leadership that will come in and do what? Restore great laws, and thus to then make a nation great once again. This is the only way. This is historical fact. This is history repeating itself. This is why democracies are always doomed to fail, because eventually there's just a lack of political sophistication, and societies always just perpetuate themselves to ignorance over time. In an ideal world, we would just completely progress to greatness for the end of time. But unfortunately, it never works out that way, and societies always devolve themselves into some kind of politically unsophisticated democracy. When democracies become ineffective, when democracies become completely full of ignorant people who have blocked the common good and have no interest in doing anything to protect, sustain, and improve our society, it eventually fades away and disguises itself in the midst of revolution, but becomes a dictatorship, going back to the return of the founding values of a great leader and a great monarch or a great king to restore great values. To reiterate once again, great leaders create great laws that make nations great. But at the same hand, okay, bad, corrupt leadership creates bad, corrupt laws that creates a bad, ignorant country and a bad, ignorant nation. In that same cases, right, governments, monarchs, great leaders come and establish and slaughter and create borders and conquer and create whole nations. Those countries then, of course, lead to some kind of constitution, some written laws, some oligarch, some kind of team that is there to kind of keep that process in place. And in the end, you would hope that, and ideally that, an oligarch would restore those great laws, that great constitution, to a democracy where people would be able to govern themselves. But over time, as people continually govern themselves, when they are historically, as we know thanks to the great political theorists of our time, they are completely incapable or unwilling to govern themselves correctly for a long period of time, that society and democracy ultimately becomes corrupt in itself. And the time when democracies become corrupt, it is only a matter of time in this case, before they evolve and retransfer themselves back to a monarch or back to a dictator, and the process just repeats itself over and over again, where a monarch becomes an oligarch, and an oligarch becomes democracies, but democracies become corrupt, and democracies will eventually become a dictatorship, or a democracy will eventually become a monarch. Thank you so very much for part 2. Part 3, we're going to move on. We are done with the doomsday, and then part 3, we're going to move into solving this process, okay? We're going to move on to the ideal versus realistic world. We're going to move into the idea of the overman and the idea of the problems of settling and the real ideal of greatness. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you at part 2. Again,